Sarah had a wicked smile as she dusted the dirt from her hands. A strong smell hung in the air, thick and horrid. As she glanced at the yard before her, she felt satisfied. Her neighbor had been taking advantage, and now she was getting her revenge. He would no longer get away with this. All she had to do now was wait. He would hop over the fence into one of her flower beds and then venture into the street. He was using her yard as a shortcut. She's asked him multiple times to stop, but he refused. She was sick and tired of being nice. Over the last few weeks, she had been paying close attention to the man's schedule. If all went according to plan, he would hop over the fence at any moment. She couldn't wait. She had planned this out meticulously. Today was the day she was finally going to teach him a lesson. This man had been abusing her yard at his convenience, and now he was going to learn a costly lesson. With a smirk on her face, she watched as the man raised himself over the fence next. And then, just like every other day, he dropped into her flower bed. The man's scream echoed through the small yard and into her home. With a grin, the older woman placed her cup on a nearby counter and made her way toward the door. He had dropped straight into her trap. But before we start, smash the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. Ex-Marine Sarah Jacobs was living her best life in Phoenix, Arizona. Having retired just a few months prior, she was enjoying a quiet life in the suburbs. Although she hadn't been there for long, her neighbors made her feel right at home. But there was one neighbor that got on her nerves. His name was Nicholas, and he had no respect for her boundaries. Nicholas's house was situated right behind Sarah's, and there was one thing they did not seem to agree on. Every morning, Nicholas would have to take a bus into town. In order to get to the bus stop, he would have to walk around the block. But he had discovered that he could take a shortcut through Sarah's yard. This way, he would save around 10 minutes of his journey. But there was one glaring problem. Whenever he would hop the fence to land in Sarah's yard, he would land in one of her flower beds. Over time, this completely destroyed the flowers she had grown. She had spoken to him about this problem, but he didn't seem to care. It was a Monday morning. Sarah had just woken up and was in the process of brewing a pot of coffee. Walking to the sink, she glanced through her window that pointed into her yard. It was just then that she caught Nicholas in the act. He tossed his bag over the fence, and a second later, he hopped over the fence too. Sarah watched with narrowed eyes. She had confronted him about this the day before, but her words went into one ear and out the other. He did not care to respect her boundaries. He had no idea who he was messing with. As an ex-Marine, Sarah had gotten used to solving problems with a more hands-on approach. This was not the first time she had asked the man to stop, but he was not listening. She was going to get her revenge if it was the last thing she ever did. She stood motionless before the window, planning her next move. It took some time, but she knew just what she had to do. That afternoon, while Nicholas was away at work, Sarah began putting her plan into action. If he wasn't going to respect her wishes on his own, she would punish him. It was just past noon when the older woman hopped into her car and made her way to the nearest nursery. She had thought of the perfect way to get back at her obnoxious neighbor. It took no longer than 10 minutes for Sarah to find exactly what she was looking for. She got 2 male employees to help her carry the bags to her car before heading back home. She had to work fast. She didn't want Nicholas to suspect anything, but she couldn't wait to see his reaction once he stepped into her trap. She couldn't stop smirking as she made her way home. As soon as she returned from the store, she made her way into the garden. Thick gloves covered her hands as she ventured into the garden with rubber boots. She dragged the 2 heavy bags with her. Cutting them open, she got to work, covering the soil and plants in thick compost. The smell was overwhelming, but she knew that it would pay off. She decided to empty both bags into the small flower bed that her neighbor had been abusing for so long. She wondered if her little prank would finally be enough to get him to stop what he was doing to her flowers. Once the ground was covered in a thick layer of compost, the older woman grabbed a hosepipe. She spent the next 30 minutes wetting the compost. She wanted to make sure it was soaking wet and muddy. Her intention was to ruin the man's entire day. The smell was horrible, but that's what she was going for. As Sarah finished off her dirty work, she had no idea that someone else had been watching her from the moment she had opened the compost bags. It was incriminating, to say the least. But this individual didn't want to rat her out. Their intentions were far more sinister than that. The veteran wouldn't see it coming. Thankfully for Sarah, her heightened senses from her military career weren't completely dulled. She felt something, like a sixth sense. She could tell that something was wrong. She whipped around and looked at the yard. The wind was picking up and moving the odor away from her house. She thought that it was a benefit, but she was mistaken. Sarah was unaware of the problem she had created. All she wanted to do was get revenge on her neighbor. But now, before she could do that, she would have to deal with a problem she never expected. She felt uneasy as her eyes darted around her yard. She didn't see anything, but she knew better than to let her guard up. Two bulbous eyes were watching Sarah from a safe distance. It was cruel and calculating. Many people underestimated just how intelligent the creature watching Sarah could be. Would she underestimate it when the time came? The almost alien form had come to Sarah's property only because of one reason. It was all because of her revenge. The creature was attracted to the smell of the compost that Sarah had laid down for her neighbor. Little did she know that it would backfire in the most dreadful way. It was a game of chicken as the creature watched Sarah, waiting for her to turn her back. But the veteran didn't want to leave herself open to some kind of attack, even if she didn't know from where. The creature watching Sarah started to get impatient for its next meal. It decided to inch closer, moving its leathery body from branch to branch. The only thing on its mind was a source of food. Coincidentally, Sarah was the perfect candidate to feed it. The closer it got to her, the faster it breathed. It was licking its lips. The animal steadied its body, preparing for the perfect pounce. This predator had done it hundreds of times before, but it had never found prey quite like this. The veteran's senses were tingling as she knew she was in immediate danger, but she still didn't know where. Would she be able to save herself? Sarah tensed every muscle in her body as she prepared herself for an attack, but that's when she saw movement out of the corner of her eye. Now that she knew where the threat was coming from, she could defend herself. The brown fur flashed across the lawn, making a beeline for the compost. She acted on pure instinct and adrenaline. Sarah rushed towards the creature. She wanted to get a better look at it before she did anything. Her body moved out of muscle memory from her old training days. She cut the creature off and looked it dead on. That's when she was finally close enough to identify what it was. But it was nothing like she imagined. The animal froze as soon as Sarah stepped between it and the compost heap. She stared it down, but as soon as she realized what it was, she let out a deep breath. It wasn't exactly the threat that she had anticipated. Maybe her senses were all messed up. The brown rat standing before her couldn't have been what her instinct warned her about. But as she tried to make sense of the situation, she heard a sound from her left. Sarah immediately got back on the defensive as she heard a sound to her left. Horror took over her face as she was about to face the real threat. The veteran was taken back to one of her deployments. She remembered stalking through the desert, keeping an eye out for mines and other IEDs, but she found something else on her patrol. Sarah snapped back to the present day and immediately knew how to face her danger. She remembered how she faced the fanged creature before. A second later, the serpent launched itself from a nearby bush. But it wasn't coming for her, it was after a rat, which escaped through a hole in her fence. The snake slithered away. Sarah had no idea where it went, but she wasn't going to wait around to find out. However, the snake would later return, disrupting her carefully laid plan for revenge. Apparently, Sarah wasn't the only one drawn to the compost she used in her garden. Sarah had never been one for pranks, but her neighbor's behavior had pushed her over the edge. His carelessness was destroying her flower beds, and she had reached her limit. She felt justified in what she was about to do. She dusted her hands and surveyed the yard, satisfied with the foul smell filling the air. Her compost trap was ready. Her neighbor Nicholas had taken advantage of her kindness for too long. Now it was her turn to make a statement. After finishing, she tossed the empty compost bags and went inside. The smell had followed her in, but she didn't care. She closed the windows and took a long shower, already imagining what would happen next. That night, she could barely sleep. Her plan was in motion, and excitement kept her tossing and turning. At first light, she jumped out of bed and checked the time. Nicholas always crossed her yard at 7:30 a.m. sharp. She had only a few minutes to prepare. With coffee in hand, she stood by the window, watching the yard like a hawk. Over the past few weeks, she had carefully observed his routine. Today was the day he would learn a lesson. Right on cue, she saw movement. Nicholas casually tossed his bag over the fence straight into the compost trap. The contents were immediately soaked in the mess. Sarah had to stifle her laughter. Next, he climbed the fence and, as usual, landed in her flower bed. But instead of soft soil, he landed in the putrid mix. From her window, Sarah could see the shock on his face. Then came the scream. His yell echoed across the yard. Sarah grinned, placed her cup on the counter, and headed outside. She was ready to witness the fallout firsthand. But as she reached for the door, she realized something else had spooked him. The snake had returned. It darted back into the bushes after startling Nicholas. Sarah couldn't have asked for better timing. Her neighbor was not only drenched in compost, but terrified. Stepping outside, she saw Nicholas struggling in the thick sludge. His clothes, hair, and face were covered. When he looked up and saw her smirk, he was livid. "How's it going, Nick?" she said mockingly. He grabbed his bag and scrambled to escape, slipping once more before managing to get out. Just before he climbed the fence, she called out, warning him that next time it wouldn't just be compost waiting for him. He said nothing, just nodded and disappeared over the fence. Sarah's satisfaction lingered for days. Her plan had worked perfectly. Nicholas never dared to use her yard again. Instead, he began walking the long way around just as she'd wanted. Her flower bed recovered quickly thanks to the compost. Finally, the problem was solved.